The 7 Years' War, known in the United States as the French and Indian War, George Washington begins that war. He's critical to its character, particularly in this part of the world, in Virginia, and in the frontier of Virginia at the time, which is out in what's now West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio. It begins with a scramble between the French Empire and the British Empire for control of the Ohio Valley. And the Ohio Valley is critical because the Ohio Valley controls the interior of the continent in a fundamental way. All the rivers there, the great rivers, the Ohio River, they flow into the Mississippi. And so if you control the Eastern Seaboard and the Ohio Valley, then you control the whole area to the east of the Mississippi River. Now, of course, the Native Americans live in the Ohio Valley, but they actually don't even control the Ohio Valley. They're under the subjecthood of the Iroquois Confederacy, which is in upstate New York. So it's a contested ground. 3 empires claim it: the Iroquois, the French, and the British. And the Virginians, like Washington, have a particular interest in that area because the wealth of Virginia has been built over the last century by expansion to the west. It's grabbing land, and then as population grows, that land becomes extremely valuable as people move into those regions. And so the people who can get in there early get a stake to that land. And so George Washington is ambitious. He's not going to inherit a lot of money from his family. When his father dies, he basically gets what he gets. And he's never going to be able to make that into, a powerful position in Virginia society. So he's got to try to get west. And so he's involved in what's called the Ohio Company early on, which is a group of Virginians interested in developing the Ohio area for their own profit and for the glory of the king's dominions. Now, Washington is placed in a position in a military role at the age of 19 after the death of Lawrence, his brother. But he doesn't really have any experience in war. It's an administrative role in the colony where he's kind of in charge of helping to train these militia groups which come together on court days or quarterly, and they're not really fighting forces. They're important, but they're not the kind of thing you can bring out in battle. So he's kind of young and naive, but he's also available when the governor of Virginia is trying to send a message to the French in the Ohio Valley. And they tap the young George Washington because his great mentor, Colonel William Fairfax, is on the Council of Virginia, so the Executive Council of Virginia, which advises the governor. He taps George Washington to take on this incredible mission where you're going to take the message of the governor of Virginia out into Indian country in the Ohio Valley and deliver it to the French, who rumors have it are there and building forts. And so George Washington ultimately does this incredible journey. He's 21 years old. He goes from October to January, and in that time, he goes from Williamsburg all the way to 8 miles from Lake Erie, on foot in the middle of winter, delivers a message and gets back to Williamsburg. It's an extraordinary, heroic effort. It's his first public role. He does it with incredible skill, so much skill, in fact, that when he gets back, the governor of Virginia asks him to publish his journal of the trip. And this is a journal that gets read in London. It's read all over the world. It's the first thing that makes him famous. And because now he has some familiarity with that region, he's also given a commission in the army that Virginia starts raising, because what they learn in the Ohio Valley is that the French are building forts and that they have their heart set on building a fort at the forks of the Ohio River, which we now know as Pittsburgh. It's a critical point to seize that, because that is where the Allegheny and Ohio rivers meet. It is the pivot point to control the region. And so there's a race to that spot. The Virginians have this army together. They're going to rush out to try to settle that area or get their army in place before the French arrive to assert their rights to that region. And Washington is made a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia Regiment, so it's a new purpose-raised regiment for this. It's not a militia unit. It's a provincial regiment. And Washington very quickly becomes the colonel of that regiment because the original colonel dies. He falls off horseback and dies, and Washington's in the field. So all of a sudden, you have a 22-year-old colonel of the Virginia Regiment who has no experience in battle. And that's when the wheels kind of fall off, because what had been a diplomatic mission very quickly turns into an open fight Washington has Native American allies that are helping him. They become aware that there's a group of French in force coming towards Virginia. And ultimately, there's a minor skirmish there. But the minor skirmish turns tragic when the leader of the French group, the officer who led it, Jumonville, is executed. He's killed after he surrenders by the Native Americans. But Washington's in command, and of course, he's the one who's responsible for that behavior. That ultimately is going to be the spark that kicks off this 7 years war, which becomes a world war. I mean, there's fighting in India, there's fighting in the Pacific, there's fighting in South America, there's fighting in Europe, and of course in North America. That becomes a part of that extraordinary war. So the French and Indian War is critical to Washington because he starts it on the one hand, it's his entree into warfare, but also he does learn how to be a leader of men through that experience, which is somewhat bittersweet. At first, Washington has a very romantic view of war, as many young men do. He's after glory. And in fact, after this little skirmish, he writes a famous letter to his brother Jack in which he says, "I heard the bullets whistle, and let me tell you, there's something charming in the sound." But that's the writing of a young man who's his first time in battle. He would very quickly learn that the experience of war was bitter and not something to be gloried in. In fact, the only autobiographical sketch he ever wrote was reflections on his time in the French and Indian War. And he's describing at that time his retreat from Braddock's defeat, in which he talks about the chaos, the groans of the dying would break a heart of adamant, and he could do nothing about it. Later in his life, he'll say that peace is my sincere wish with all the world, that war is not a solution. So the French and Indian War is an awakening for him in a critical way. The other thing, of course, he learns is the practicalities of how to manage men in battle, and he's going to obviously use that in the Revolutionary War.